I've probably seen several thousand dead bodies. But this was something that I had never seen before. I mean, to see a person being able to sit upright, completely on its own, without caving into their own weight after being dead for a day is something that will never happen.
If I just came into the room and sort of casually looked at him, I would have thought he's meditating. And I mean, he was sitting and his skin looked extremely fresh.
I don't presume to understand it, but I do know that this isn't something that makes sense from the physiology of a human body that I was taught.
In what Tibetans call Tugdam, advanced meditators die in meditation. Their bodies don't show the usual signs of death for days or even weeks. According to Tibetan Buddhist tradition, consciousness is still present.
There is such cases. That's a phenomenon. So we must sort of investigate how it happened.
An old monk has died 10 days ago, but his body is not putrefying as one would expect in such warm summer weather in the hills above Dharamsala. By entering a deep meditative state at the time of dying, some Tibetan Buddhist practitioners are allegedly able to arrest the physical processes of death. The monk's body is checked daily to see if he remains in the sacred state of Tugdam.
Tuktam shuya tanga su tangbo ha ko imindo ane dende che ane tangi khoya to imba ane di dok te yapote to hoi di sha ta pa ane ta tangbo ta che jo di dende che do ane dende dena ane tuktam shu mindo dende dena ane di ki kwatang dende do 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 dende ta de ane di yapote ane tuktam shu re lai do ane lama de ta che ane tuksamay shuktu laydo ane diring tuktamla shukna dan diring na nima chukchik daw chere nima chukchik chere
With the support of the Dalai Lama, a team of scientists has, for the first time, been given permission to study Tukdam. Anthropologist Dylan Lott is the manager of the Tukdam project in India. He leads a cross-cultural, multidisciplinary team working in the Tibetan resettlement communities of India.
This particular retreatant was known to one of the doctors on our team while he was alive, and so he was amazed how much healthier he looked after his death. And this was another instance where there's no fan, there's no AC, it's a mud floor, a few robes and scarves to adorn the body, but we were permitted to do inspections of the full body, both morning and evening, and to record the data that we needed. Which was spaced around the rituals that were being done in the room.
Mm-hmm. The skin just still has such amazing integrity. That should not be.
Yeah. Yes, slowly.
The Center for Healthy Minds at the University of Wisconsin-Madison has been at the forefront of research into meditation, mindfulness, and healthy emotions. Its Tukdam project is the first scientific investigation into the phenomenon. The project is headed by neuroscientist Richard Davidson, some years ago named by Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world.
How important is the color?
Yeah.
We don't really know the answer to that.
No.
That's an important question to ask the forensic experts.
Okay.
Anything else?
He was suggesting that we begin to look at the amount of antibiotics that they've been given and whether or not they've had meals within 8 hours of their dying, because that's going to affect decomposition greatly. So we need to start gathering that information.
And how many Tukdam cases are there?
We have a total of 12 that I think where we have a good number of days post-mortem.
What would be ideal is before you left for India, if we had a file that contained images of all the 12 practitioners twice a day with the indication of the number of days post-mortem that the image was taken, the time of day, and the ambient temperature of the room.
Yeah, that would certainly be ideal.
If we use the standard, and I would say relatively superficial criteria of modern Western medicine, I think we can say they're clinically dead. We can say that their brain is showing a flat line, that there's no heart rate, we confirm that with EKG, and there's no breathing. That we can say, but whether we can say that there's no brain function, no, we cannot say that. We don't know that yet. One of the reasons why we're doing the work we're doing is to determine if there may be some more subtle kind of brain activity that is responsible for the signs of Tukdam. The fact that you see a flat line does not necessarily mean that the entire brain is dead.
유미따라서 갑뒤 제에 홍소소 제와 슈주 대급 상매 차루 영제기 핀주로람 툭지체 슈 모저도스 가데 포타 exam에 질론 이동 중이 나와 죽직 세 니상이 니라스 먼저 디 내가 디 통마 고주가 싫어 지동구 어디 가서 이동 중일론이래 이동 중일론이 대진지 양고 두담 중에들이 니주 중선아 양고 냠지 가래디 신주지하기 니주 고주 주고라 또도 대진이 소도 거래 대단히 공도 나올라 아니 냠렘바 냠렘바기 딱 결하기 냠누지 숨고라 상만 먼저 이자 그냥 막 꿰시기로
이게 다 주로서 단자 뜻이야 되네. 내제 공단 소만 단자가 되는 거. 근육가 이송아. 다 뜻이는 내제 공단자다. 다 강제는 많이 도담돼야 될 거로 같아. 되는 거.
그래 도담디가 좀 어서지 도담디데 주에 갈라 때 통보디 때 어디 소문 신에 도고 와. 진짜 벌라 디니주 싸워 쉬우지래. 당고 셰바 코란 레바다 콘서 자와 샤사로 레바 메와 샤스는 코 셰바에 메 콘서 켈리데 지고로
진짜 가고서 그 뒤주는 거는 다 오케이 산에서 다 시사를
다라
당원도 된 이혼 지를 다 되게 제려 다 고성만 가는 거 따고 열어서
지단기 네 냠된 지경기기다 레바치로와 디기 내당 간제도 레바낭이 레아 간제 지기도 닝기 내당 간제도 디레 다에 지거래 어디 주드 체가 생겨라
야야야
계획을 좀 보수 여러분 주게 돼 제가 볼 야부 되게 좋다 시다 요 말와 야부 때디 사실 모두 비대로 맞지 빼 있거든요
아 라바지
예요 자 상호 되겠다 다 암전 아직이요 암전 아직 뭐 선사
The Tukdam project traces its origins to conversations that I had with the Dalai Lama concerning the relationship between the mind and the brain. And of course, in modern Western neuroscience, the mind is regarded as, if you will, what the brain does. I don't think anybody would deny that they are somehow extremely importantly related, but whether they should essentially be regarded as one and the same is a question. In the phenomenon of Tukdam, there is said to be the presence of the most rudimentary form of awareness, which still occurs after the point at which they would be considered dead by a conventional Western definition. So if any of that is true, it would raise serious questions about the mind and the brain, and it would begin to introduce some problems in that conception. And so the Dalai Lama encouraged me to start studying Tukdam.
We already have some kind of project to further investigation. We call Tukdam. After death, still body remain fresh. So we have the fuller sort of explanation. Mind, many level. Now this very moment, one seeks the mind very grosser level with 5 senses of organs. Then during sleep, dreaming, another level of mind. then deep sleep without dream, further deeper. So when people faint, then that sixth mind further deeper. And at the time of death, because of the deepest, so the sixth mind consciousness. So they took them. I already mentioned that. You see, the person who remained the deepest level of consciousness and with deepest level of subtle energy.
When somebody is Tudam, means the person died in meditation. That person was doing meditation practice all their life. And their meditation has to be very deep and very profound. It has to be mind meditation. Meditation to recognize the nature of mind. So meditation, you become. You are not meditating, but you become the meditation. And at that moment, then your body remains in a very unusual state, just like alive. And mind goes into perfect state of meditation. Tengar Rinpoche is a very senior master, so when he was in Tukdam, it is not a surprise. He will be in Tukdam because he is Tengar Rinpoche.
Tengar Rinpoche was the abbot of Benchen Monastery. With both legs amputated due to diabetes, Rinpoche was in such a bad state before he died that he could barely sit up. In the end, he died sitting in Tukdam and remained in the state for more than 3 days. This is a common duration for Tukdam and matches the Tibetan idea that a subtle aspect of mind may stay in the body for up to 3 days after death. In rare cases, Tukdam can even go on for weeks. Vanessa Lopez is a mortician from New York City. At the time of Tengar Rinpoche's death, she was in Kathmandu helping to preserve remains of Westerners who had died in mountaineering accidents. Rinpoche's followers invited her to check the body in Tukdam.
When I initially walked into the room, I had no idea that, there was a dead person in that room because nothing sort of told me that there was. I looked around the room and there was some monks that were sitting and they were praying, and there was a man at the end of the room just sitting in a meditative position. And so I thought that he was just another person that was there who was doing their meditation and their prayers for the person who had died. But then Tempa sort of pointed to me and told me, this is Tengar Rinpoche, this is, our teacher who has just recently died, and we just want you to take a look at him. And I was very shocked because to me it looked like a person who was just sitting in a meditative position and just, he looked pretty much alive to me. They told me as soon as he comes out of his tukdam state, then we will be contacting you so that you can perform some kind of an embalming procedure on him.
There are signs for the ending of tukdam. If the person was sitting, the body will slump and the normal physical phenomena of death will appear, as if the post-mortem process has been stalled and is now released. For Tibetans, these are signs that the meditation has concluded and consciousness has left the body. After Tenga Rinpoche's tukdam ended, Vanessa was called to embalm the old Lama.
I was pretty surprised to be able to see that his blood was flowing as easily as it was, especially for a person who had already been dead for about 4 days. The color of it would definitely change into a darker sort of color, and his was still reddish, you know, like the normal color of blood. And the procedure went amazingly well compared to what I was expecting.
Unlike Vanessa, Tukdam project scientists have not been able to look inside a Tukdam body so far. Blood and tissue samples could shed light on cellular mechanisms involved, but Tibetan concerns over disturbing the sacred state have so far prevented collecting samples. Instead, the project has focused on recording EEG brainwave data and documenting the body's physical state. This also requires great cultural sensitivity, which is something the project's Tibetan collaborators bring on board. The project has worked closely with Dr. Tsetan, the Dalai Lama's personal physician and director of Delek Hospital, as well as with staff from the Tibetan medicine clinic, Mense Kang.
When it first began, we did a few Tudam cases with my staff in Delek Hospital. Then I thought, if there is a way to connect, Buddhist medical science and Western science, Mense Kang should be the partner, There's a very major cultural factor in this, I think, And also, having to deal with Tudam subjects is a very sensitive issue. So unless we have people who have some standing in the community as a medical doctor or being of the same culture, Tibetan, it helps to relate much better to people who, at a time of loss, wouldn't want to deal with any other person easily.
This one should last a long time. You're only having it on for a few minutes. You don't have to leave it on the whole session.
And do you have any kind of device to read the false smell?
False smell. I'm glad you asked that question. I have been doing some reading lately on gas spectrometry and trying to see what it would be like to get something like that for the field. And I will let you know as soon as I do.
Nitrogen level, whatever, the gas released from the body.
How do we begin?
Tudam shusha sene, tambo nganzu pagene permission longo re, nganzu ki process chidang de tende re, teni the kunzu ki degrees, and permission tena, and nganzu dogo re. Data collection che, Dipa Dr. Richard Davidson, Pranzu ki pagela university la.
Too late, but we did get a good interview with the students.
Okay.
Chilugi tanda shisha laitila nganzu karishi gore chungwa rakba kabas shimes still dying nganzu oti shigo tene modern science tone death ra tadi nganzu lebe lega chigi mebade khelenge gore niga chipare ningi chele kabade niga chipare tene ukawate chikpa khelengyor modern science soarikwa tene nangbe tatu kunzu sumba chikpa chikyang shegyo tila kheba yo mare ine mansu gi tila death lagyo mare modern science ki ti shitsare ta chugyo dire ta kunzu shitsare le ta chue de nganzu chi shimbares.
I'm going to start this. R for perimortem, and P for postmortem, including those we think were looked up. Because part of that is
Itola samaka tene dana shi chumwa de ma timen de tene nawa chepa topa tama de la chiba yo se chiba yo se di sem yo se di ya mi sangma de chargyor mi sangma de chargyor 미수 총바이네 차르기요 이네 디네 갑라 치와 베세티 뮤스 버치고 거려 야 디치와 요세레도 와스네 디 뮤스 신체 한 디땡라 되네 냠내치니 데데데라 되네 도담을 쉬고 왔어요 와
Basically, the core description that we get is they meditate on the clear light at the moment of death, and then they don't die all the way. And what you see from the outside is that the heart stops and the breathing stops, but the body stays warm, especially around the heart, for a long period of time. So for heartbeat, there's two obvious ways of measuring heartbeat. One of them is you put electrodes on the chest, and the other one is you use one of those finger clip things. So we have both of those. For respiration, there are two main ways of measuring respiration. One of them is you put a belt around the rib cage, and the other one is a capnograph, where you have a tube that picks up the gas and sees that you're breathing. And then we had two ways of measuring warmth, and one of them was a thermometer probe that you would tape on somewhere, or you use this thermal camera, which has to look at the exposed skin. So then we get to the really complicated part that we spent a lot of time going in and out of it, which is this brain stuff. You know, when you're neuroscientists, then you come in and you put an EEG on it, and then you see what it looks like. And then we have these other things about the decomposition, which at first we thought was an unambiguously physical prediction, but then after talking to the people who are actually the experts on the physiology of death, we learned that under normal circumstances, there's an enormous amount of variability in how bodies decompose.
There are cases where the body has remained without decomposing for quite a long period of time. In certain cases, up to 16 or 17 days, in conditions where it's quite hot in terms of the ambient temperature, tropical, where you'd expect decomposition to clearly occur at a faster rate. So we consider that to be unusual. Whether it's within this normal range or not, we really can't say at this point in time.
We have the questionnaire about his mental clarity, and then a little bit about his practice history, and then what brought him to this life of retreat.
지도 빼셨다고 그러더니 빼셨다고 했고 따와 자지면 셀은 좋아하는 것도 세노토가 내가 말어. 그래서 세노토 되네 셀 좋아할 때마다 조금만 돼서 홀로 일하네 돼 있어.
This must be from the living practitioner.
Right. This is from living retreatment we were working with most recently. And so this is what we still have to work on getting the graphs here, but we're getting the
This is the mismatch negativity.
mismatch negativity.
Yeah. What's the difference between these two standards?
The red would be the deviant,
Yeah.
the green is standard, and the black is the difference
Oh,
wave, and
yeah.
it's being plotted in the negative here.
One strategy is to sample a very large number of people when they're still alive. Then we can classify them post hoc. We'll have one group that went into Tukdam, another group which did not. We can go back to their pre-death, to their living signals, and apply machine learning algorithms, for example, and see if there are any patterns which distinguish the individuals who go on to Tukdam versus those who do not. And then we can interrogate those patterns and see what the differences are. What is the difference in the brain of a person who, when he or she dies, goes into Tukdam compared to when they do not?
When someone dies in Tukdam, it's important to start recording data as soon as possible. However, the distances in India are great, and the deaths often occur in remote areas, so it can take days for the team to reach the bodies. There are also cultural reasons for delays.
Within the Tibetan tradition, it's customary to wait 3 days after someone has died before you begin moving ahead with cremation. But at that point, you would also know whether or not somebody is in Tukdam. And so oftentimes people will not reach out to us until that 3rd day. When we collect EEG data, we do 2 auditory protocols to ascertain whether or not there's some activity. Increasingly, the 2 types of auditory stimuli we're using are proving to be diagnostic and assessment tools across a range of minimally conscious states, coma, vegetative states. The contention is that, at least for a time after death, there's some residual brain activity, some activity, residual brain activity in the brainstem that's responsible for the integration of the body. In the absence of that, then we have a different question. It becomes another challenging question. Well, if there is no low-level residual activity in the brainstem in those who are observing in the state of Tukdam, then how do we explain this delay in decomposition?
The modern science ki thande shimju chidang chero thande shimju chidang de nga deba khangam do jumje kharin se na thande modern science ki cable de zo call kar gi ore ti brain wave la touch che ore brain wave ti touch che on de la brain wave ti manju kheleng ge mare ga sare chik koran jo gi thanda chingwa la gar che dila ditidwa skin temperature lan tisha tati kande na mission ta nganzu she di ninga she yoro ningi nang lo la thwe yo ta me ningi nang lo la tene namshe thamo de lega chigi tu mentu titaya ma do ti skin gi temperature di gi tukdam tiki nechuji lentu ayo.
So there's the warmth around the heart, and there were 4 cases during the time that I was involved, and we only got clear thermal imaging data one of the times, and they were stone cold. That, you know, you could see very clearly in the thermal imaging that there's the wall and then the body, and everything is all the same color. There was no variation whatsoever. And every day, a group of devotees would come in and would carefully inspect the person, and they would feel carefully with the back of their hand, and they would be commenting on it, and then they would agree that the person was still in Tukdam. The hardest to explain is if all these people they're not crazy at all, they are in fact legitimately putting their hand there, and they really sincerely are experiencing the feeling of it being warmer than it should be. And the camera is not malfunctioning, and it really is definitely showing that from the point of view of physics, the thermal vibratory energy is the same in the body and the wall. When the Tibetan tradition talks about Tukdam, they don't have thermal imaging cameras. So when they say the body stays warm, the specific statement that the tradition is making is that when you touch the body around the heart, you experience the feeling of warmth. Everything that I've ever experienced is completely consistent with the idea that people experience Tukdam exactly the way the tradition says that people experience Tukdam. Nothing that I've observed has contradicted that at all. Just the more time that I spent on this project, the more striking was the contrast between, as long as you weren't trying to do a whole bunch of hard science with equipment, everything looked one way. And then as soon as you start bringing the equipment in and trying to nail everything down and take a bunch of physical measurements, then it all falls apart.
Several medical doctors interviewed for this documentary reported feeling warmth around the heart area of deceased monks said to be in Tukdam. These included doctors who looked after the 16th Karmapa, one of the most important Tibetan spiritual leaders of the 20th century. He died in Tukdam in a hospital in Zion, Illinois, outside Chicago.
There was no respirations, no sign of air. The eyes were just beginning to dilate, the pupils. So clinically dead. And then they prepared, and then about an hour and a half later, then they called me into the room to feel above the heart. And the area was warm. It was really warm, I remember that.
The area around his heart, when you felt it, put your hand on his chest, still felt warm for the first 2 to 3 days after he died, which obviously from a Western point of view is not consistent with what we would expect. And then beyond that, he did begin to look better after he died. His color was better. His face almost filled out in an odd way, and his body was really strong looking and vibrant in a way that was very striking to me.
For me personally, it's hard to explain, except to say that there must be some ability of an individual or some unintended ability of an individual's, capability of somehow delaying some sort of a metabolic process or a natural process that we all undergo of degradation, And how that's done in terms of its mechanism, I can't really figure out. But to me, it seems that there is some control by something over the physical world, basically. It kind of defies that. But then it comes down to the issue of whether one believes in a consciousness or a mind that travels from one state to the next state, leaving the physical body. Some sort of a subtle state, that science has yet to discover, basically, that is capable of doing something like this. There's definitely a mind over matter control there. That's what I'm trying to get at, I think,
The Tukdam project also includes anthropological investigation into the Tibetan Buddhist theories, practices, and ways of life that produce Tukdam. An expert meditator in his high Himalayan retreat has agreed to an interview with Dylan.
ini chisim tamo galtewa ini rupatendo sim taru doadang 동반이 가시기 줄로 가실라 ini 에셀라기를 가실라 동반이서 또 나와지면 또 여말 동반이서 쑥 줘야 여말에 나와지간라 또 되고 그래서라다.
So mind become totally empty. 동바지 갈때 돼.
다 된대 동상대.
Remains in the mind remains empty.
다 에셀때 간데 되대 그랬어요. 에셀때
emptiness or stress.
So when someone pronounces death, if they're in Tukdam, the heart is not active, but there's still, the body is preserved in a way. Why does the skin stay supple? Why is the face radiant? How is that connection, that little mind, that subtle mind?
인자디베 수부 참말에 캬대게 소런데 인기르게 다 셔터고 말와 이나야 디기디당 이네 된다 셈디 대대어와 셈디 대어자 셈디 슈기 주니 셈셈스는 룽레 대어다 셈당 룽이다 직바지고 와르다 뭐 룽셈 직바직지고 와래 어때 딩지찬이 셈디 슈 침부지어자 디기 느토 이네 디기 질라 이네 딩예지 다 망보직라 제 망보직라 때는 루스가 전에 되면 로섬기 도슬라다.
After decades of studies in monastic colleges, this monk has spent over 20 years in isolated meditation retreat. He embodies a system of knowledge arising from a cultural and historical background very different to ours. Here, meditative experience also informs views about consciousness and its subtler aspects said to be separate from the brain. This is what reincarnates, continuing from one life to the next. Tukdam makes sense within this Tibetan system of knowledge, but has proved challenging for science with its own cultural assumptions.
It's probably pretty clear to everyone now, but only gradually became clear to us, that just all these questions of the cultural differences and, the different views of like what is medicine and what is the body and how does the body relate to the mind and things like that, that are really just very deeply culturally different. And a lot of the cultural differences were the ones that are actually the foundation of Western science. So it was a scientific project that only made sense in the context of being able to understand the cultural construction of science itself, but you can't, like, part of the whole thing about cultural constructions is that you can't understand them from inside of them, because when you're inside of them, then you're just inhabiting them. So it was very jarring to deal with it all, because it was really more an anthropology project with a neuroscience component rather than a neuroscience project, period.
Dr. Tomlin, Dr. Sutton, welcome. Welcome the rest of the team. I know things have been busy, so I'm just going to jump right in to the research. There's much more we can go over, but I want to give the highlights of what we have. Okay? I'll skip this a little bit because they're here. So then what I decided to do was to try and compare the healthy subjects that we have with the actual Tukdam data. And so this is an example. You can see there's not much that's happening for the red line, the Tukdam line, but we're getting a real clear signal for the practitioner.
I think that the way we have moved around in terms of the last 7 years, I think the approach hasn't been effective enough. To me, from my understanding of His Holiness's hope of this project, really is to have some proof that there is some sort of consciousness or a mental or a mind continuing that goes on beyond this life, basically. The only first kindergarten step is really to say, is there a difference between a gross mind and a subtle mind?
We cannot prove rebirth. We cannot prove mind. We cannot prove subtle mind. What we can do is look at the effects of those practices on the body that are unusual and that Western science or medical science doesn't have a good explanation for. With the EEG approach, it has to be within this first few hours. Even if we get informed of 12 Tukdam in the next month, if we're only knowing about it day 5, it's not going to change anything.
No matter how much we study with this, even within 6 hours, I think the chances that the EEG will show that actually very, very good. I think, this is my feeling. Because person is dead, for all purposes, the person is dead. The subtle mind is so deep down. Because I can't even think of a day when you can really kind of pinpoint it with some sort of machine.
After a decade of research, Richard Davidson's team published a null finding. They have not found brain activity in Tukdam subjects so far. The research effort continues. A team associated with the Russian Academy of Sciences and Moscow State University have also started studying Tukdam and are now collaborating with Davidson.
Maybe such sort of research work even sort of may take generations. Okay, but worthwhile to make some research. It's something factor, some fact, right? Oh, so one phenomena, something mysterious, is really worthwhile to investigate.
So really, at kind of the most fundamental levels, this work can begin to raise questions about the ultimate nature of consciousness and where that might come from. And these are some of the most profound and deepest questions in philosophy and science today. And in many ways, this relates to what philosophers have called the hard problem, which is how is it that experience, subjective experience, can arise from the material matter of the brain. And I think that if we're honest with ourselves, really deeply honest, I don't think that we've made much progress on that question in the last 100 years. This work relates to that issue and begins to ask different kinds of questions about it and raises the question of perhaps there might not be a complete identity between the mind and the brain. Clearly, they're intimately related. Exactly how they're related, nobody really knows if we're really honest, I think, with our observations.